She was a young woman whose life was opening up in exciting ways, building a name for herself in Colombia's electronic music scene, connecting with people through her sound, and dreaming about where her career could take her next. Valentina wasn't just playing music, she was building something. She had plans, she had momentum, and people believed in her. But on a cold January morning in Bogota, all of that came to a sudden, violent end. And what happened to her would leave people across the country and far beyond trying to understand how something like this could happen. Valentina Tres Palacios was 21 years old. She was a DJ, a social media influencer, and someone who genuinely loved the energy of nightlife. Friends knew her as creative and outgoing. She had a natural way of connecting with people, whether she was behind the turntables or just spending time with those closest to her. Online, thousands followed her, watching her sets, her travels, and the everyday moments she chose to share. She wasn't just chasing attention, she was chasing a future she could be proud of. Then, on January 22nd, 2023, everything stopped. That Sunday morning, in the Los Cambulos neighborhood of Fontibon, a man who had been searching through trash bins for something to eat noticed a blue suitcase inside one of the containers near a children's playground. At first, it looked like just another discarded item, but something about it felt off. When authorities arrived and opened it, they found the body of a young woman inside. She had been wrapped tightly in black industrial tape. It didn't take long for investigators to confirm her identity. It was Valentina. The news hit her family and friends with a kind of shock that's hard to put into words. Just hours earlier, she had been alive. She had gone out, spending time with someone she trusted. Her boyfriend, an American man she had met during her travels. Their relationship was still new, but it had quickly become serious. They shared plans, conversations, and the kind of excitement that comes with building something together. Now, she was gone. The forensic findings made it clear this was not an accident. Valentina had been strangled. Her death was the result of a violent attack. Afterward, her body had been placed inside the suitcase and left among garbage, as if someone had tried to erase her. Investigators immediately began working to piece together her final hours. Surveillance cameras from her apartment building and surrounding streets became critical, and what they found raised even more disturbing questions. Footage showed a man leaving the apartment Valentina had been staying in. He was pushing a cart. On it was a large suitcase, covered with a blanket. The man was later identified as John Nelson Poulos, an American citizen and Valentina's boyfriend. The video showed him carefully moving the suitcase, loading it into a vehicle, and driving away. Hours later, that same suitcase would be found in the trash container, with Valentina inside. News of the discovery spread fast across Colombia. It was on television, in headlines, and all over social media. People who had never met Valentina felt shaken by it. Parents thought about their own daughters. Friends held each other a little closer. And across the country, many people were asking the same question. How did this happen to someone so young, so full of life, and so clearly building a future for herself? For advocates and activists, Valentina's death was part of a much bigger conversation, one that had been ongoing for years. Her case brought renewed attention to gender-based violence and intimate partner abuse. It forced people to confront an uncomfortable truth, that danger doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from someone you trust, someone you let into your life. This is the story of Valentina Tres Palacios, a young DJ who was finding her place in the world, whose life was taken far too soon, and whose death would spark outrage, international attention, and a legal case that many hoped would bring accountability. Valentina was born on June 16, 2001, in Bogota, to her parents, Giovanni Tres Palacios and Laura Hidalgo. She grew up in a close family, alongside her younger brother, Daniel Tres Palacios. From the beginning, it was clear that Valentina had a creative side. She was drawn to music early on, not just listening to it, but exploring it. She was curious about how songs were built, how sounds could be layered, and how rhythm could change the way people felt. Family members remember her spending hours experimenting. She would play around with beats, try different mixes, and teach herself through trial and error. It wasn't something she was forced into. It was something she genuinely loved. As she got older, that interest started to turn into something more serious. In her early teens, Valentina began DJing at small gatherings with friends. She didn't have much equipment at first. Sometimes she borrowed what she needed. Sometimes she made do with whatever was available. But she kept going. She kept practicing. And people noticed. She had a natural ability to read a room, to understand what people were feeling and respond through music. She knew how to build energy, how to shift moods, and how to create moments people would remember. By the time she was around 20 years old, Valentina had started performing professionally under the name DJ Valentina. She began getting booked at clubs and events around Bogotá. Each performance helped her build confidence and visibility. Friends described her as focused and driven, but also kind. She didn't see success as something to keep to herself. She encouraged others, especially younger DJs, who were trying to find their own way. She shared advice. She showed up for people. And even as her career grew, she stayed deeply connected to her family and the people who mattered most to her. That was who Valentina was, someone with ambition, creativity, and a genuine warmth that people could feel the moment they met her. Valentina's social media gave people a window into her world. It wasn't just clips from her DJ sets or photos from clubs. It was everyday life too. Time with her family, laughing with friends, joking around, and sharing small, real moments. People followed her not just because of her music, but because she felt genuine. She didn't pretend to be someone else. What you saw was who she was. She also had bigger plans. She wanted to travel. She talked about performing at international festivals and bringing her sound to new audiences. She was proud to be from Colombia, and she wanted to represent that wherever she went. Music for her wasn't just about building a career. It was how she connected with people. It was how she expressed herself. And the people closest to her saw that clearly. They described her as focused, happy, and thoughtful. Someone who cared deeply about others and wanted to leave her mark. But even as her career was growing and new opportunities were opening up, something else was unfolding in her personal life. The life Valentina had built, filled with music, relationships, and plans for the future, was about to change in a way no one around her was prepared for. What happened next would leave her family, her friends, and her entire city searching for answers. The morning of January 22nd, 2023, started like any other day in Bogotá. In the days leading up to it, Valentina had been busy. She had performed at clubs, spent time with friends, and continued her relationship with her boyfriend, John Nelson Poulos, an American man she had met through a dating app. What Valentina didn't know was that Poulos had a past he hadn't fully revealed. He was married, and his previous relationship had involved serious conflict and allegations of abuse. He had left that life behind and started presenting himself differently, building new relationships, including the one he had with Valentina. To her, he was someone she trusted. In the hours before everything changed, Valentina was still active on social media. She shared posts showing her energy, her work, and the nightlife she was part of. Nothing in those moments suggested anything was wrong. But by Sunday morning, people around her began to notice something unusual. She wasn't responding to messages. She wasn't answering calls. At first, it seemed small. Maybe she was resting after a long night. But as more time passed, the silence started to feel different. Friends grew concerned. This wasn't like her. Surveillance cameras captured her last known movements near her apartment in Fontibon. After that, there was nothing. No messages, no activity, no sign of where she had gone. Then came the moment that would change everything. That same morning, a man going through garbage containers in the neighborhood came across a large blue suitcase near a playground. It didn't belong there, and something about it caught his attention. When he opened it, he immediately realized something was terribly wrong. Inside was the body of a young woman. Emergency services were called right away. Investigators arrived, secured the scene, and began the process of identifying her. It wasn't long before they confirmed it was Valentina. For Valentina's family, the news didn't feel real. Just days earlier, she had been living her life, working, creating music, talking about her plans. Now they were being told she was gone. Her parents, Giovanni Tres Palacios and Laura Hidalgo, were devastated. So was her younger brother. They weren't just grieving her death, They were trying to understand how something so violent could happen to someone they loved so deeply. When the autopsy results came back, they confirmed what investigators had already feared. Valentina Tres Palacios had died from asphyxia caused by strangulation. She also had injuries consistent with blunt force trauma, which suggested there had been a physical struggle before she died. Afterward, her body had been wrapped and placed inside a suitcase. Investigators believed this wasn't done in panic. It was a deliberate act to hide what had happened. Surveillance footage soon became one of the most important pieces of evidence. Cameras captured John Nelson Poulos inside the apartment building where Valentina had been staying. He was seen pushing a cart. On it was a large suitcase. He moved it through the building and eventually loaded it into a vehicle. That same suitcase would later be found in the garbage container with Valentina inside. At that point, investigators focused their attention on Poulos. He quickly became the main suspect. Authorities issued alerts and began working to locate him. But Poulos was no longer in Colombia. Records showed that he had left Bogotá and traveled to Panama. Investigators believed he was trying to avoid being caught. What had started as a national investigation was now becoming international. Colombian authorities coordinated with Interpol and Panamanian officials to track his movements and prevent him from disappearing. Meanwhile, people across Colombia were following the case closely. Many had seen Valentina's work. Others had learned about her through the news. Her death hit hard, especially for young women who saw parts of themselves in her story. Someone building a career, trusting someone, and planning for the future. The case also sparked wider conversations about violence against women and how often it happens within relationships. People wanted answers. They wanted accountability. With Valentina's body found and surveillance footage pointing directly at Poulos, investigators moved quickly. They began reconstructing her final hours, reviewing evidence, and building a case that could stand in court. Every piece of information mattered. Every timeline detail mattered. They weren't just trying to understand what happened, they were preparing to prove it. Following the discovery of Valentina's body in the suitcase, Colombia's main investigative authorities, including the Fiscalía General de la Nación and the Policía Nacional, formally classified the case as feminicidio agravado, or aggravated femicide. This classification recognized that Valentina's killing was not only intentional, but that it happened within the context of an intimate relationship, making it an especially serious crime under Colombian law. Forensic experts carefully examined both the crime scene and the suitcase. Their findings confirmed what investigators had suspected early on. Valentina Tres Palacios had died from asphyxia caused by strangulation. Her body also showed injuries that pointed to a physical struggle. This wasn't accidental. It was a violent assault. The way her body had been wrapped in industrial tape and left inside a suitcase in a public trash container suggested that someone had taken deliberate steps to hide what had happened. Surveillance footage soon provided some of the clearest answers yet. Cameras showed John Nelson Poulos, the American boyfriend who had been with Valentina in her final hours, moving a large suitcase out of the apartment. The suitcase was covered, but investigators were able to match it to the one later found in the garbage container. The footage showed him pushing it through the building and loading it into a vehicle. That video established something critical. Poulos was the last person seen with Valentina, and it directly connected him to the suitcase her body was found in. By then, Poulos had already left Bogotá and traveled to Panama. What was now a murder investigation had quickly turned into an international search. Interpol became involved, and Panamanian authorities began working closely with investigators from Colombia. Officials believed Poulos was trying to leave Central America entirely, possibly heading to Europe in an effort to avoid arrest. But he didn't get far. On January 24, 2023, Poulos was arrested in Panama just hours before he was scheduled to board another flight. Authorities later said that quick coordination between countries played a key role in stopping him before he could disappear. After his arrest, he was returned to Colombia, where prosecutors formally charged him with aggravated femicide and with attempting to conceal evidence. As investigators laid out the timeline, the sequence of events became clearer. Valentina had been alive inside the apartment she shared with Poulos shortly before her death. Afterward, investigators said Poulos placed her body inside a suitcase and transported it to the trash container where it was later discovered. The steps taken afterward, moving the suitcase, leaving the country, suggested he knew exactly what he was doing. The case quickly became one that people across Colombia followed closely. For many, it represented something larger than a single crime. Advocacy groups pointed to Valentina's story as an example of how intimate partner violence can escalate, and they called for stronger protections and faster legal action in cases involving violence against women. With Poulos now in custody and charged, the focus shifted to the courtroom. Investigators had gathered the evidence. Prosecutors were preparing their case, and Valentina's family, along with the public, waited for the legal process to begin, hoping it would bring answers and some measure of justice for the life she lost. After months of investigation, the case against John Nelson Poulos finally moved into the courtroom. This was the stage where everything investigators had uncovered, the forensic evidence, the surveillance footage, the timeline, would be presented and examined in full. The proceedings drew intense attention across Colombia, with national media closely following each development. Poulos was formally charged with aggravated femicide and concealment of evidence. These charges reflected what prosecutors believed the evidence showed, that Valentina's killing was intentional, and that steps were taken afterward to hide her body. During the early hearings, Poulos did not accept responsibility for the charges. By pleading not guilty, he ensured the case would move forward to a full trial where both sides would present their arguments. Prosecutors laid out their case step by step. They presented surveillance footage showing Poulos moving a large suitcase out of the apartment and loading it into a vehicle. They introduced forensic testimony, confirming that Valentina Tres Palacios had died from asphyxia caused by strangulation, and that her injuries were consistent with a violent assault. Witnesses and investigators helped establish the timeline, showing that Poulos was the last person known to be with her, and that he left the country shortly after her death. Together, the evidence told a clear story, one that prosecutors argued showed planning, intent, and an effort to avoid accountability. The defense, however, offered a different interpretation. They suggested that Valentina's death was not premeditated and may have resulted from a domestic conflict rather than an intentional killing. Their goal was to challenge the severity of the charges and raise doubt about intent. But prosecutors pointed back to the sequence of events. They emphasized what happened after Valentina died: the placement of her body inside a suitcase, the effort to remove it from the apartment, and Poulos's decision to leave the country soon afterward. They argued that these actions showed awareness and deliberate decision-making, not panic or accident. After reviewing the evidence and hearing arguments from both sides, the court reached its decision. On June 4, 2024, a criminal court in Bogotá found John Nelson Poulos guilty of aggravated femicide and related charges. He was sentenced to 512 months in prison, more than 42 years. It was one of the most severe sentences handed down in Colombia for a femicide case. The court also ruled that after serving his sentence, he would be deported, and he was prohibited from contacting Valentina's family for 20 years. For Valentina's family, the verdict brought a sense of resolution, but it didn't take away the loss they continue to live with. Her father spoke publicly after the sentencing, sharing both relief that the legal process had reached an outcome and the pain of losing his daughter in such a violent way. In the months that followed, friends, fans, and fellow DJs found their own ways to remember her. There were vigils, tribute performances, messages shared online. People remembered her not for how her life ended, but for how she lived, her energy, her creativity, and the connection she brought to others through her music. With John Nelson Poulos sentenced and the legal process complete, attention slowly began to shift. The courtroom had delivered its verdict, but for Valentina's family, friends, and supporters, this wasn't the end of her story. It became a time to reflect on who she was, the life she built, the goals she was working toward, and the impact she left on the people around her. Valentina Tres Palacios' life was taken far too soon, but the influence she had didn't disappear. What she created, through her music, her relationships, and her presence, continued to live on. While the trial brought accountability, it couldn't undo the loss. What remained were the memories, and the way she had touched so many lives in Bogota and beyond. The people closest to Valentina remembered her as someone full of ideas and energy. She wasn't afraid to work hard for what she wanted. She had become a familiar name in Bogota's electronic music scene, not just because of her technical skill, but because of how she connected with people. When she performed, she was focused, confident, and fully present. Offstage, she was supportive and encouraging, especially to others who were trying to build their own path in music. Friends talked about her generosity, how she shared advice, helped others learn, and celebrated their progress. She wasn't competitive in a negative way. She wanted to grow, but she also wanted the people around her to grow too. She balanced her ambition with kindness, and that's something people didn't forget. Her family faced the kind of grief that never fully goes away. But alongside that pain was a sense of relief that the person responsible had been held accountable. In public statements, they spoke about the importance of remembering Valentina for who she was, not just focusing on the way her life ended, but honoring the life she lived. They also spoke about something larger. They wanted her story to help bring attention to the realities of femicide and intimate partner violence. They hoped that by sharing her story, it could contribute to greater awareness and ultimately help protect others. Valentina's voice may have been silenced, but the mark she left, through her music, her relationships, and the people she inspired, continues to be felt. Valentina's case also led to wider conversations across Colombia. Advocacy groups spoke openly about how common gender-based violence still is, and they used her story to push for stronger protections and faster responses from the justice system. Her name became part of discussions in schools, universities, and community spaces where people talked about how to recognize unhealthy or abusive behavior and how to build safer, more respectful relationships. For many, this wasn't just about one case. It was about making sure her story could help prevent future harm. At the same time, Valentina's presence continued to be felt through her music. Recordings of her DJ sets, videos she shared online, and memories from people who saw her perform kept her work alive. Tribute events were organized in her honor. Fellow DJs played sets dedicated to her. Friends and fans gathered in the same spaces where she once performed, remembering not just her talent, but her energy and the way she made people feel. Valentina Tres Palacios had worked hard to build something meaningful, and even after her death, that work didn't disappear. Her story is a reminder of how much one person can impact the people around them. Through her creativity, her determination, and her relationships, she left a lasting impression on her community. It also brought attention to the ongoing reality of femicide and intimate partner violence, and the responsibility of institutions and communities to respond, protect, and take these cases seriously. Valentina's life was short, but it mattered. She's remembered through her music, through the people she encouraged, through the conversations her story helped start. And for the many who followed her journey, she remains more than a victim. She remains a young woman who created, connected, and left her mark on the world around her. Thank you for watching Murder Ledger. We explore real cases, unanswered questions, and the details that refuse to fade. If these stories matter to you, consider subscribing and sharing your thoughts in the comments.